the fiancé of an Ohio art student who went missing nearly 13 years ago, was sentenced Thursday to 3 years in prison. John Carter, 36, was charged with 2 counts of murder when he was arrested in March 2023. He eventually pleaded guilty last month to involuntary manslaughter as part of a plea deal. The charges stemmed from the August 2011 disappearance of Katelyn Markham, who was last seen at her home in Fairfield, Ohio. At the time, Markham was a few weeks away from finishing her graphic arts degree at the Art Institute of Ohio, Cincinnati, and Carter had said they were planning to move to Colorado later that year. John Carter, 36, was given the maximum sentencing that he could have for involuntary manslaughter in connection to Katelyn's death, a charge that he pleaded guilty to after striking a deal with prosecutors last month. He was initially charged with 2 counts of murder last March. "I'm thankful and grateful to the judge for handing out the sentence he did," Dave Markham, the father of Katelyn, said to reporters on Thursday. "It's not closure but the start of something else to come," Markham said, hinting at the possibility of new legislation allowing prosecutors to bring more charges forward in similar cases where the statute of limitations prevented it. Katelyn went missing in August 2011 at 22 years old, just weeks before she was set to finish her graphic arts degree at the Art Institute of Ohio in Cincinnati. Carter was reportedly the last one to have seen her alive and called 911 to report her missing when she did not show up for work. Her skeletal remains were found 2 years later in a wooded area approximately 20 miles from where she was last seen in Fairfield, Ohio. Though Katelyn's death was ruled a homicide, it was never determined how she was killed. Years passed before prosecutors were able to put together enough circumstantial evidence to charge Carter with her murder. Last month, Carter admitted to causing Katelyn's death involuntarily, but did not offer a single explanation as to how or why it happened. Investigators allege that someone helped Carter dispose of Katelyn's body, according to court documents, but no other person has been charged in connection to the case. Stay up to date with notifications from The Independent. The clanking sounds of carnival rides at the Sacred Heart Festival echoed throughout the neighborhood. Yet, half a mile away from the enticing aroma of corn dogs and cotton candy, a mystery was about to unfold. "Hi, my name is John Carter. I am calling. I know you're not supposed to report a missing person before 24 hours. But my fiancée is missing. I can't find her anywhere." Dispatcher: "Okay. Where did you see her last?" 911 caller: "I saw her at like 12 o'clock last night. She lives in a house by herself. I'm really nervous. Her car's still there." John Carter's fiancée Katelyn Markham would never be seen again. Instead of celebrating Katelyn's 22nd birthday, friends and family ramped up search efforts, despite Fairfield police saying there was no indication of foul play. "Katelyn is the love of my life. I've been with her for 6 years. We've been engaged for a year. Today would have been exactly a year. Today is also her birthday," Carter said, as searchers divided into groups and hit the streets by foot, car, and by ATV. Carter walked through the last time he saw Katelyn, the night of August 13th. He said he left her townhouse around 11 to 11:30 and received a text from her about an hour later. When Katelyn failed to show up for her job at David's Bridal the next morning, friends began to worry. Katelyn's car was still parked outside her Dorshire Drive townhouse. "I have nothing in mind. She would never just leave. She's too pragmatic. She's never just take off and go somewhere," Carter said at the time of her disappearance. "I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. I just want to find Katelyn and celebrate her birthday and go to Red Lobster like she was planning. That's all I want to do." John Carter, right, was sentenced to the maximum jail time for involuntary manslaughter in the death of his fiancée Katelyn Markham. Left. John Carter, right, was sentenced to the maximum jail time for involuntary manslaughter in the death of his fiancée Katelyn Markham. Left. Facebook/Butler County Jail. Your briefing on the latest headlines from across the U.S. Email: I would like to be emailed about offers, events, and updates from The Independent. Read our privacy policy. The family of Katelyn Markham, an art student who went missing 13 years ago, watched her ex-fiancé sentenced to 3 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter on Thursday. A long-awaited moment, but one that does not bring closure. John Carter, 36, was given the maximum sentencing that he could have for involuntary manslaughter in connection to Katelyn's death, a charge that he pleaded guilty to after striking a deal with prosecutors last month. He was initially charged with 2 counts of murder last March. "I'm thankful and grateful to the judge for handing out the sentence he did," Dave Markham, the father of Katelyn, said to reporters on Thursday. "It's not closure but the start of something else to come," Markham said, hinting at the possibility of new legislation allowing prosecutors to bring more charges forward in similar cases where the statute of limitations prevented it. The parents of Katelyn Markham speak with reporters after John Carter was sentenced to 3 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. The parents of Katelyn Markham speak with reporters after John Carter was sentenced to 3 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. WLWT/YouTube. Katelyn went missing in August 2011 at 22 years old, just weeks before she was set to finish her graphic arts degree at the Art Institute of Ohio in Cincinnati. Carter was reportedly the last one to have seen her alive and called 911 to report her missing when she did not show up for work. Her skeletal remains were found 2 years later in a wooded area approximately 20 miles from where she was last seen in Fairfield, Ohio. Though Katelyn's death was ruled a homicide, it was never determined how she was killed. Katelyn Markham, a 22-year-old art student who was killed in 2011. Katelyn Markham, a 22-year-old art student who was killed in 2011, in memory of Katelyn Markham/Facebook. A forensic anthropology report said that her remains may have been moved from where they were first left, according to local news outlet WLWT5. Years passed before prosecutors were able to put together enough circumstantial evidence to charge Carter with her murder. Last month, Carter admitted to causing Katelyn's death involuntarily, but did not offer a single explanation as to how or why it happened. Investigators allege that someone helped Carter dispose of Katelyn's body, according to court documents seen by the Cincinnati Enquirer. But no other person has been charged in connection to the case. John Carter was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the involuntary manslaughter of Katelyn Markham. John Carter was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the involuntary manslaughter of Katelyn Markham, Butler County Jail. But due to Ohio's statute of limitations, prosecutors could not bring other charges like abuse of corpse, in part because Katelyn's body was concealed for 2 years. "I do not feel 3 years is justice, not for Katelyn, not for her sister, not for me, her friends, or the entire community that has ached and grieved alongside us," Markham told the Cincinnati Enquirer at the time of the plea deal. But Katelyn's family is hoping to change that. Markham said that the family was working on a new set of legislation called Katelyn's Law that would allow prosecutors to bring more charges forward in cases of involuntary manslaughter, homicide, or murder where the victim's body is missing but later found. Markham described his daughter as a loving person who made people feel good and had immense artistic talent. "She had talent and she was going to go someplace. I'll see a piece of art sometimes and I'll think, that should be Katelyn's up there." The charges stemmed from the August 2011 disappearance of Katelyn Markham, who was last seen at her home in Fairfield, Ohio. At the time, Markham was a few weeks away from finishing her graphic arts degree at the Art Institute of Ohio, Cincinnati, and Carter had said they were planning to move to Colorado later that year. Skeletal remains identified as Markham's were found in 2013 in a wooded area in Cedar Grove, Indiana, about 20 miles west of her home in Fairfield. Authorities ruled her death a homicide but did not determine how she was killed. Katelyn Markham, Dave Markham. Butler County prosecutors have said Carter caused Markham's death by physical violence and by force. They said Thursday that Carter still hasn't explained how or why he killed Markham. Click here to view related media. Dave Markham, Katelyn Markham's father, read a letter in court before Carter was sentenced. "Not a day goes by that I don't think of Katelyn," he said, imploring Judge Daniel Haughey to sentence Carter to the maximum sentence by law. "Let him feel the pain that many of us have endured for the past 13 years. Carter did not speak during the sentencing hearing. His attorneys asked Haughey to impose probation or a minimal prison term, asking him to consider the law and not emotional statements. Haughey, though, imposed the maximum term allowed under the plea deal, saying Carter has shown no genuine remorse for this offense. He also noted that Carter did not try to help Markham or acknowledge what happened to her immediately after her death. Markham's father previously told CBS News affiliate WHIO that Carter stole a lot from his daughter and her loved ones. "I often wonder what she'd be doing with her art and her career, and I think she would be just an amazing woman," he told the station in March 2023. "And it does make me a little angry that he lived for 12 years scot-free thinking he got away with it. And a lot of us have missed Katelyn tremendously every day for 12 years. And it's not fair and it's not right. And hopefully it's going to be made right." In the quiet community of Fairfield, Ohio, the disappearance of 21-year-old Katelyn Markham sent shockwaves through the tight-knit population of just over 40,000 residents. What began as a missing persons case in August 2011 would evolve into a complex murder investigation, spanning more than a decade and crossing state lines. The twists and turns of this case would leave a family in anguish, a community in disbelief, and ultimately reveal a betrayal of the deepest kind. Background: Katelyn Markham was described by those who knew her as a little eccentric, very creative, thoughtful, and an all-around sweet person. A talented artist from childhood, Katelyn was often seen with a paintbrush tucked into her hair, always on the lookout for her next creative project. In 2011, she was pursuing her passion as a graphic art student at the Art Institute of Ohio, Cincinnati, balancing her studies with a job at a local bridal shop. At 21, Katelyn seemed to have her whole life ahead of her. She was engaged to her boyfriend of 6 years, John Carter, and the couple had plans to move to Colorado after her graduation. John, who shared Katelyn's artistic inclinations, worked as a glass-blowing instructor. To those on the outside, they appeared to be a perfect match. Two creatives ready to build. In the days that followed, the community began to realize there was much more to Katelyn than just a face on a missing person poster. She was so hyper and sweet and fun to be around, her best friend Michelle Feist said, a colorful and eccentric art student who helped others come out of their shell, like a butterfly. Darkness now overshadowed the light Katelyn brought into the world. Friends tried to make sense of her disappearance. Katelyn's father Dave was unable to hold his head up during a vigil, while pictures of his daughter set to song played for a community as they prayed for her safe return. "I'm so proud to be her father," Dave said. At the time, Dave Markham and John Carter appeared united in their grief. News of Katelyn Markham's disappearance began to spread across state lines and into the home of Texas EquuSearch founder Tim Miller. Finding Katelyn, he said, would be a challenge. Police said there was no evidence of foul play, but there was also no indication Katelyn left on her own. 19 days into the search, Dave Markham found comfort in the amount of support he was getting from Texas EquuSearch, who was leading the search in Ohio. Volunteers tore through heavily wooded areas, scoured creeks and trekked along train tracks and abandoned buildings looking for any clues that would lead Katelyn home. April 10, 2013, father's intuition became a reality. Indiana State Police confirmed skeletal remains found in Cedar Grove a few days earlier belonged to Katelyn Markham. For Dave, the outcome had been a fear and an expectation. "I'm glad I can finally put her to rest and move on to the next chapter and find answers and figure out what happened," he said. Andy Hicks was out searching for scrap along this rural, winding road when he stumbled upon human remains. Hicks said the bones did not appear to be buried, simply dumped, with trash piled on top. As he looked further, there was an even more disturbing discovery. With the investigation crossing state lines, Indiana State Police took the lead. On the second anniversary of Katelyn's disappearance, the coroner ruled her death a homicide, cause undetermined. It was a tough day to be out in public, but Dave chose to share it with the community who has been by his side. Carter's reaction was sent in a text. "I was only on the news before because I wanted to find Katelyn. Now that is done, I have no interest in putting myself on camera. I just want to mourn my loss and try to put my life back together." In the meantime, Dave's mission hadn't changed. "Stop waiting. It's time. I think somebody knows something and I'd like for them to step forward," Dave said. More eyes became focused on Carter as Katelyn's remains were dumped along a familiar stretch of road. The most direct route from Carter's home in Fairfield to his father's Indiana farm on Kokomo Hill. A forensic anthropology report was made public years later. It noted injuries to Katelyn's left wrist, 3 or 4 sharp force wounds. The report also revealed Katelyn's skull was found inside a knotted plastic grocery bag. Since her head had not decomposed in the bag, the belief was her body was first hidden somewhere else and then moved to Big Cedar Grove. Dave Markham found himself connecting with other murder victims' families. By 2014, Fairfield police had 6 unsolved homicides on their hands. It gets more frustrating because none of them get solved, he said. Families of Chelsea Johnson, Lainey Gwinner, Joey Oakley, Damian Taylor, and Deasia Sims were all seeking justice. The youngest of the 6 was 15-year-old Chelsea Johnson. Her body was found near a creek bed. She was stabbed to death. "I would not wish this pain on my worst enemy," Donna Johnson said of her granddaughter. 19-year-old Joey Oakley was murdered 4 months after Chelsea was killed. He was found in the same creek bed, shot multiple times. "He was 19 going to be 20, and he had such a long life to live," his mother said. 29-year-old Damian Taylor was killed in his apartment that same year. Weeks before Christmas, 20-year-old Deasia Sims' body was found near the waterworks plant. Lainey Gwinner's death dates back to 1997. She was last seen alive leaving a Fairfield bowling alley. Her body was discovered a month later in the Ohio River. As the holidays approached, all the families were reminded they'll be starting another new year with no answers. "Get to relive it every year. 4th year coming and it hurts," Dave Markham said. The start of 2015 began with a big boost in reward money. An anonymous donor added $25,000 to the pot, putting Katelyn's reward at $75,000. By now, Dave began demanding action. Time for new detectives to investigate and take a look at what a Florida-based private investigator uncovered. J. Ryan Green told WLWT he made his way into Katelyn and John's inner circle and interviewed more than a dozen people. 5, excluding Carter, agreed to take polygraphs. Green narrowed his investigation down to 2 people who he believes knew what happened. Subject 1 took a polygraph and failed the polygraph in epic proportion per the polygraph examiner, Green said. Green says another friend failed questions. He handed his findings over to Fairfield police, but says it went nowhere. The investigation, now in the hands of the Butler County Sheriff's Office. After months of working the case, in 2016 detectives revealed that they believe they know who killed Katelyn. "We believe we have narrowed it down to a strong person of interest," Sergeant Rob Whitlock with the Sheriff's Office. They would not name the person. The Sheriff's Office made it very clear. "They weren't going to tell me specifics, so I don't know names. I just know they've been working on it, and the statement that they have a person of interest is encouraging," Dave said at the time. Sitting down with Karen Johnson last month, Detective Joe Nerlinger and Sergeant Rob Whitlock peeled back the curtain of their investigation. They started with John Carter's 911 call. The 911 call stood out to us. So when we're looking at the timeline of things and listening to the 911 call, I remember telling Jim, "This is made up. This call. You can hear it in his voice." "This is a lie," Whitlock said. But, with 20 other persons of interest and no smoking gun, they had a lot of work to do. "So we went through, meticulously alibied people out in different ways," Nerlinger said, "until Carter was the last man standing. We brought up things evidentiary-wise, and I never had a suspect point out to be that something was circumstantial. It's very rare for someone that we interview to use that word," Nerlinger said. At the very end, for months later, when we presented our letter to admin of what we had done, the last line in it is, "These investigators in their opinion believe that John Carter is responsible for the disappearance and death of Katelyn Markham." That's how confident we were. I'm not going to put my name and my career and my profession, and neither is Detective Nerlinger, on putting an opinion on something like that if you're not 100% confident, Whitlock said. But, with no direct evidence, investigators knew it would be a tough one to prosecute. Katelyn Markham's name slowly faded from headlines after the major development that brought Dave Markham hope, until August of 2018. Another young woman's body was found in a Liberty Township field. 23-year-old Ellie Week lived one town away from Katelyn and had been reported missing. Ellie and Katelyn's appearances were strikingly alike. Westchester police quickly made an arrest in Ellie's murder, Michael Strauss, who had been stalking her in the weeks leading up to her death. Then, a picture surfaced of Strauss in a group photo with John Carter at the Sacred Heart Festival. Carter confirmed the photo was taken after Katelyn's death, but it sparked new conversations about a possible link between the two homicides. But as time passed, it seemed social media was more interested in a connection than investigators. The 10-year anniversary of Katelyn's death came and went after a decade of false hope. Many doubted there would ever be justice. Then, on a wintry evening in February of 2023, there was an arrest in connection to the death of Katelyn Markham. A man by the name of Jonathan Pomerton was indicted for perjury. He was arrested at his job. Prosecutors said he lied to investigators about the Markham investigation. So, who is Jonathan Pomerton? WLWT circled back to the private investigator. He was right there in their inner circle, Green said. He was a close friend. So any bonfires, any parties or anything like that John Pomerton was involved in because he was one of John Carter's best friend. Green previously interviewed Pomerton for a podcast titled Gone at 21. John Pomerton was actually one of the first to arrive at Katelyn's house after John Carter discovered she was missing, he said on the podcast. Here's what Pomerton said in the podcast about that day. Talked to John, said he looked through, didn't see anything that looked too out of sorts and, tried to keep him calm. After Pomerton's arrest, Butler County prosecutors confirmed more details and a search warrant was executed at John Carter's mother's house, where Carter lived at the time of Katelyn's disappearance. This has been a long time coming, a long time, Dave Markham said. In his heart, Dave always believed John was involved in some way. This is a little bit more reassuring that, my suspicions weren't totally off base, he said. Carter, escorted into a courtroom where he first entered a plea of not guilty. Butler County prosecutor Mike Gmoser shared never-before-seen evidence. Poems his investigators found a drawer in Carter's mother's home. Carter's name handwritten on top. One reads in part, "Deep down I love her. You want to kill her. But I love her. She must die. I can't kill her. Yes, you can." Another reads, "Oh no, what have I done? What do I do? I know I'll bury the body in the backyard. No, I'll bury it under the trailer and wait until the grass grows over it and leave before anyone reports it missing." Yes, yeah, that's a great idea. Prosecutors say they found this written in caps on top of a closet. "I slit your wrist with the key to your heart." Displays of a sinister side that Detective Nerlinger and Whitlock say they saw years prior. I think John Carter kind of gives you the impression at first as kind of the stoner pizza boy, but he's got a dark side, Nerlinger said. I've interviewed from homicides to rapes down to trespasses 1,000 people, and I've never interviewed a psychopath, and that's what I said when he left. I said that's the first psychopath I've ever interviewed, Whitlock said. John Carter was released from the county jail after posting a $1 million bond. The perjury charge was dismissed against his childhood friend, Jonathan Pomerton. The only explanation from Gmoser was Pomerton was going to be a witness in Carter's murder trial, and that would cause a conflict. Meanwhile, court filings gave us insight to the prosecutor's theory. 3 to 6 months before Katelyn's disappearance, Katelyn confided in friends saying she felt trapped in the relationship and was unhappy with Carter's lifestyles, including his heavy use of drugs and pornography. Another friend told police on the Friday before Katelyn was last seen alive, the mood between Katelyn and Carter was as if they were breaking up. Carter's cell phone activity was also of interest to prosecutors. Records show his phone became inactive just after midnight on August 14th and stayed that way for the next 15 hours. And Katelyn's phone went dark 2 minutes after Carter's went inactive, which means Katelyn's either turned off, battery died, or the SIM card was removed. Also in the overnight hours of August 13th and 14th, 2 teenagers who snuck out of their house told police they saw 2 cars drive up to Carter's home from the direction of Katelyn's townhome with their headlights off and then left. Investigators say they believe Carter and an unnamed friend were in those 2 cars and were able to obtain material used to wrap Katelyn's body. A search warrant shows investigators seized 16 items from Carter's mother's home, including roll of landscaping material. 13-year-old homicide case now wrapped in circumstantial evidence. With John Carter's trial date approaching, a surprise admission in court. Judge, what is your plea to count 1 involuntary manslaughter, a felony of the 3rd degree? Carter, guilty. After more than a decade of denying he had anything to do with Katelyn's death, Carter admitted his guilt. Dave had a front row seat. Nerlinger and Whitlock were nearby. Although an involuntary manslaughter conviction carries much less of a penalty than murder. He said in front of Mr. Markham and told him, "I killed your daughter," Whitlock said. When asked how she was killed, Carter's defense attorney said, "We can't make any comment right now." Karen Johnson, "John, can you say how?" John Carter, "I cannot. We may never know the answer. The only detail revealed in court, Katelyn died during a commission of a misdemeanor assault. The following day, loved ones gathered to process how the maximum sentence Carter could receive is 3 years. When you think about 36 months, that sounds like nothing. Nothing for her life. And that's true, there are not enough circles in hell for John Carter to visit. I understand, Tina Barrett, the family attorney, said. Through angry voices, there were also quiet words of comfort. Friends shared stories of Katelyn. With a butterfly tree that had been planted in Katelyn's memory nearby, Dave was once again reminded, he's not in this alone. Katelyn's spirit lives on. There's been days that I had bad days in the early on times, and a butterfly would come fly around me, and I'm like, "Oh, hi, baby."